Hello there, I'm Pastor Calvin Lindstrom, and I'm happy to be joined by Will Estrada, who is Senior Counsel for Homeschool Legal Defense Association. Will came in to speak to a group of homeschoolers, and I wanted to get him into the office for a quick interview. We are going to discuss what is HSLDA, and for those in Illinois, what is House Bill 2827. If you live in Illinois, you certainly know what this legislation is about. Just to get an update, Will has been fighting this legislation, testifying before the Illinois legislature, and so I wanted to get his updated opinion on what's going on. So Will, thanks so much for joining me. Tell me what is HSLDA? I know about it. Hopefully most of our viewers do too, but tell us more about what HSLDA does, why it's so important for the homeschool community.
Well, first off, Calvin, thank you for having me. It's always fun to come out to Illinois. I flew in this morning to speak at a large homeschool co-op in the Chicago area. And Calvin, you picked me up, took me to breakfast, gave me a tour.
You paid for it.
Well, yeah. At least I can do for you picking me up from the airport. Fun fact, my family actually used Christian Liberty for some of our homeschool curriculum in the early years. We were looking at some of the tomes. I felt like Gandalf in Minas Tirith looking through the records. Couldn't find what year it was. I'll need to ask my mom what year she had the curriculum. I'm sure she's got it at her house as well, those records. But HSLDA was founded in 1983. We're 42 years old. In the 1980s, late 1970s, early 1980s, that's when homeschooling was having a resurgence nationwide. And the education establishment was fighting back. Parents were being prosecuted. In some cases, they were being thrown in prison. They were under investigation simply for wanting to exercise their God-given fundamental right to direct the education and upbringing of their children. The interesting thing, this kind of leads into HB 2827, is not really in Illinois. And that's because in 1950, there was the landmark Illinois Supreme Court decision of People versus Levison. Marjorie Levison and her husband were Seventh-day Adventists. They felt that, I was actually looking over the court case today, and they felt that they could not send their children to public school, that the competition between kids was not conducive to a Christian lifestyle and upbringing. And they also, and this is in the Supreme Court decision, the court found that they believed that the best education for a child was the fields and the home and a homeschool mom and not a certified teacher. And they've been prosecuted, they've been convicted of truancy, and then the Supreme Court cleared them and said that homeschooling was legal as a type of private school. And so there were families in the 70s and 80s who were leaving Texas, leaving Michigan, leaving Iowa, and they were coming to Illinois to be able to homeschool freely.
For our Illinois listeners, we say, wow, people moving to Illinois because of freedom. Well, God moves in mysterious ways.
Back in the day, that's what was happening. And so that was when HSLDA was founded. We did a lot of legal work, legislative work to defend and advance homeschool freedom. The last cases, 1994 was the Texas Leaper decision, and then 1996 in Michigan. Those were really the last times that parents were being prosecuted and convicted for homeschooling. And so since those times, the mid-1990s, homeschooling has been on a trajectory of more states embracing freedom, less regulation, homeschooling kind of going from fringe to mainstream to accepted. And really the high water mark is just after COVID, when you had millions of families pulling their kids out of public school, the masking issues, putting them into private Christian schools like yours, Calvin, or homeschooling them. And today there's anywhere from between 5 and 7% of the school-age population, so about 4 million kids who are being homeschooled at home, and then about 10% of the school-age population that's being educated in private schools. So almost 1 out of 5 kids today in 2025 is being educated outside of the public school system. And so HSLDA exists to protect families as they're choosing how to educate their children, to defend homeschool families in the media, in the courts, and in the legislature.
So you mentioned almost 30 years since a major court case. Why should a family that is homeschooling say, why should I consider being part of HSLDA if there haven't been these attacks on homeschooling for almost 30 years?
Yeah, so great question. So those were, the 30-year mark is court cases where families were being convicted of homeschooling.
Got it, okay.
We have still been very active in the courts. There was a major case in 2008. The family hadn't been convicted, but it was an issue of could you homeschool in California? That was the In re Jonathan L. case, which really 2008 solidified the legal status of families being able to homeschool in California. But we've done a lot of litigation on cosmetology, for example. Do you know, Calvin, it's actually easier to get into Harvard for a homeschool graduate than it is to get into a cosmetology program. So we've
Okay,
had to
yeah,
litigate on those issues,
okay.
really just kind of eliminating discrimination. So that's one thing we do. We do a lot of work defending families. If truant officers come to the door,
Mhm,
if school districts are misinterpreting the law.
mhm,
One of the states that I handle for homeschool legal defense is Pennsylvania, which is a very highly regulated state. The four most regulated states right now are New York, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island.
oh, okay,
But even
well,
in states, like Virginia or Missouri, we still constantly have school district officials pushing back, and so we have to
mhm,
defend the families. We defend families in Child Protective Service investigations where their homeschooling is being looked at as a risk factor. And then, as we've seen here in Illinois most recently, we are a voice for homeschool freedom and parental rights in the
mhm,
media and in
mhm,
the legislature.
mhm,
This year, so far, across all 50 states and the U.S. territories, we've reviewed over 2,000 bills. We've had
wow,
major fights,
wow,
not just in Illinois, but in Virginia, in Minnesota, in West Virginia, in Oklahoma, in other states as well. Not all have been defensive. In
mhm,
some states like Wyoming and Montana, we've seen significant restrictions lifted and
mhm,
homeschooling protected by the
mhm.
legislatures.
Well, friends, check out hslda.org,
.org,
correct?
yeah.
And I'm thankful for the work that they have done, Will, in particular, for our own state, Illinois. House Bill 2827 was introduced, one of the, I don't know, 10,000 bills potentially introduced in the Illinois legislature. Tara Costa Howard is the sponsor of this legislation. Will tell us when this legislation was first introduced, what would it have required Illinois families who homeschool to do?
Yeah, so the story actually starts last year.
Okay.
Last June, ProPublica and Capital News Illinois jointly did this long form. I Hard to describe it as anything other than an expose hit job against homeschooling. And
Mm,
basically, they said the premise of this ProPublica story last June in 2024 was homeschooling is leading to abuse and neglect.
mm,
And 2 weeks after that, the next shoe dropped, and that was when they did a follow up story saying this legislator in the Chicago suburbs, Tara Costa Howard, is calling for more regulations on
mm,
homeschooling. So that was it. We went to DEF CON 1.
mm,
We have worked very closely with the private school community in Illinois,
mhm,
with Illinois Christian Home Educators,
mhm,
ICHE, with local homeschool groups here in Illinois. And we said, this is it. We have to
mhm,
motivate, we have to watch, we have to be involved because we think a bad bill is coming. So
mm,
nothing happened in 2024. There was a 6-day veto session around
mhm,
Thanksgiving of 2024 where we
right.
are on high alert. Then January comes,
Yeah.
nothing had happened, and we're like, okay, are we going to dodge a bullet? Then February 5th was
Okay.
when the bill was introduced, and the homeschool the homeschool act, as HB 2827 is titled, 45 pages in the initial
Mhm,
draft of regulations, not just on homeschool families, but on
mhm.
private
Yeah.
schools. The initial version said that there were 3 requirements on traditional brick and mortar private schools like yours.
Mhm,
That number one, they had to register. Currently, it's voluntary with
mhm,
registering with ISB. Second, that they had to require that every single person, not just teaching staff, have a high school diploma. And third, that they had to not only collect all the information on the students and parents who are enrolled in the school, the students who are enrolled and parents who are of those kids, but then they had to turn that information over to ISB.
mm,
And then, of course, the first draft said if you don't file this homeschool declaration form by August 1st, then there were immediate criminal truancy penalties. In
wow.
Illinois, that's a class 3 misdemeanor, $500 fine, 30 days in jail,
Hmm,
criminal record, criminal conviction.
mhm.
It would have made Illinois from one of the best states to homeschool into the worst state to homeschool
Mhm.
overnight. Um,
So, Will, would that have gone further than what other states are requiring currently?
So that's a great question, Calvin, and it's a little complicated. It
Okay.
would have been not the most restrictive state of what homeschoolers need to do. For example, in New York, you have quarterly reports that you have
Okay.
to do to the school
Mhm.
district. In many states, you have to turn in standardized achievement tests.
Right.
In Pennsylvania, you need to have an evaluation at the end of every year with a certified teacher. So
Hmm.
it didn't have anything like that. but it would have gone further than any state in putting those mandatory
Okay.
criminal
That's
penalties
interesting.
if you
Okay.
didn't turn in the
Yeah.
paperwork. And that was what always irked me. The sponsor would go around saying 38 states have this. Well, yes, 38 states have some form of notification that you
Mm-hmm.
have to provide, but not one of them, not even New York or Pennsylvania,
Mm.
have mandatory
Okay.
criminal penalties if a family forgets to file a piece of
That's
paperwork.
okay. So that is a very significant aspect. So if they
Correct.
say, well, it's like what other states are doing, no, it's not just like what other states are doing.
Only nation, only state to have kind of that criminalization of failing to file a piece of
Right.
paperwork. So the rest is history. You know, about 8,000 people came out to the
Mm-hmm.
Capitol on March 19th. I was one of the people who
Right.
testified against the
Mm-hmm.
bill. You all, many of you were there.
Mm-hmm.
The Capitol was shut down by the fire marshal. There were about
Mm-hmm.
500 people who could not get in and who stayed outside. It was a marathon 3-hour
Mm-hmm.
hearing. And really, after that, the bill, even though it passed out of committee, it was significantly weakened. And a lot of Democrats, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
particularly the Black Chicago legislators, they said,
Mm-hmm.
we cannot support
Mm.
this bill. There was a fantastic press conference. Chris and Aziza Butler, Chris is a pastor in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
LaShawn Ford, a Democrat legislator from
Mm-hmm.
the Chicago area, came out in Chicago at Daily
Mm-hmm.
Plaza
Kill
beginning
this
of
bill.
April. And that's what they said. And I remember what LaShawn Ford said. He said, this bill is a prison pipeline for
Yeah.
parents who just simply want to love their children.
Yeah.
So the bill ran into significant problems. Tara Costa Howard brought an amended version, kind of dropped some of the requirement that private schools
Mm-hmm.
turn in all this database to ISB. And then it dropped the mandatory criminal penalty, but said if you don't file the paperwork, it's a referral to the state
Mm.
attorney.
Okay.
So yeah, maybe you'll win in court, but you're still going to be investigated by the state attorney and
Mm-hmm.
potentially prosecuted. And again, even that language,
Right.
Calvin, is the only one in the nation.
Mm. Okay.
Many states have a kind of civil process if you
Mm-hmm.
don't file homeschool paperwork. Illinois with HB
Mm.
2827 would make that a criminal
Mm-hmm.
enforcement mechanism. And of course, you know, we hear legislators, and I agree with them, that we should reduce criminal penalties for nonviolent offenses. And so this bill would go in the complete
Yeah.
opposite
Right.
direction.
Exactly.
And I think, no, we can talk about that. I mean,
Correct.
it seems to be stalled.
Right. So that was I've lived in Illinois long enough to know that bad legislation that has significant opposition. I think of there was abortion legislation, 40,000 witness slips against it, very much like the homeschool bill in terms of the witness slips against it. Looks like it's not going to pass, and then somehow the Democrats find a way, last hour, smuggle it through. So my encouragement for families is keep in touch, keep in prayer. It's not over until the legislative season officially ends, and then it could be called back though in the fall veto session. Correct?
Well, you're absolutely correct. As the great Yogi Berra once said, it ain't over till it's over.
Right.
The session ends on May 31st.
Okay.
The bill did not pass out of committee by the crossover date, which was I think April 19th.
Okay.
So it's in the Rules Committee. There's a saying in Springfield that bills go to the Rules Committee to die.
Okay.
But as you said, there are procedural ways to kind of waive
Right.
those rules. The good thing has been it's not just Republican opposition to
Right.
the bill.
Yeah.
It's been
Uh-huh.
bipartisan opposition. We don't think that they have the votes, but we are watching it like a
Right.
hawk. We have our
Mm-hmm.
team in Springfield working closely with
Good.
ICHE, with our allies in the private school
Mm-hmm.
community. I feel cautiously optimistic that we are going to beat the bill for this year. Of course, you know, not declaring victory. You're
Mm-hmm.
absolutely right.
Right.
We're encouraging people send thank you letters to the
Mm-hmm.
legislators
Yeah.
who either didn't vote on that procedural
Mm-hmm.
motion to move the
Right.
bill to third reading, or who did vote against it. So it was
Mm-hmm.
41 who voted against it, and I think 6 legislators who did not vote. The good news is even though the bill, as many of you saw, had a procedural move to third reading, we believe that many of the legislators who voted for that procedural move would not have voted for the
Okay.
bill on final passage.
That's
But you know, if it's true that we've
mm-hmm.
defeated the bill this
Mm-hmm.
year, it's a miracle. It's by the
Yes.
grace of God and the
It
hard
is.
work
It
of
is.
not just homeschool parents, private
Right.
school parents,
Mm-hmm.
freedom-loving Illinois residents, Republican, Democrat, third party, rich, poor, black, white, urban,
Mm-hmm.
suburban, who
Yeah.
really came out and said, "Why are we
It
going
is.
after
Right.
homeschoolers?" I
If
mean,
you look at the diversity of the crowd in Springfield or at that rally, this is not just, I mean, this is this is an issue that has been embraced by people in Illinois, both, as you say, urban, suburban, and rural.
Yes.
And it's encouraging to see what God does. Two reflections from my perspective. There was earlier legislation that was introduced maybe 12, 13 years ago that I think,
2011, I think.
okay, so
HB 136.
14 years ago.
Yeah.
And that was, I think, shut down even at the committee level, correct?
It got one vote in committee.
So it was such an overwhelming response, and it was like, wow, we killed it. This went on, was much more dramatic, and I look at it as God teaching. 14 years later, a lot goes on, things do change, and God, in a sense, encouraging us to remember, you know what, our freedoms come from Him, and this is an issue that we have to be vigilant on to keep it. So there's a sense where I'm thankful for this legislation, even though I want it to be opposed and defeated. It gives you work to do, which you have plenty of other work to do, but a good reminder of what the Lord is. We're not strong in ourselves, but God can work through us. And when you go to Springfield, some of the people there are very welcoming. The average workers there are very welcoming. The legislators, I don't think they care one bit about us, but God can change their hearts and work in their hearts in ways that we can't see. So my takeaway, it's not about our strength or legislative prowess. It's about God using us as witnesses, even little kids that were taken there to the Capitol that brought up, I think, a beautiful witness. Maybe if our legislators didn't all recognize it, other people did.
Yes.
And that was, I think, part of what God has used.
I think that's so true. And I encourage people, pray for our legislators, whether they were with us or against us, whether they were sponsors of HB 2827 or not. This has been a really, it's not over yet, obviously. Right. We could still suddenly have to do witness slips and be back in Springfield. But if the current position holds of the bill not moving, then this is just, you're absolutely right, Calvin. Just a testament of what God has done. I love the passage in Lamentations 3. It is of the Lord's mercies we are not consumed. His compassions fail not. Great is thy faithfulness. Amen. And we've really seen that time and time again, particularly of God's favor on the homeschool community. We're a tiny minority. Correct. Christian education is larger, but still, we're not the majority. Probably never will be when it comes to how children are educated. But God has really protected it. I was reflecting, Calvin, 100 years ago, the battle was over whether private schools like this one could exist. You had Meyer versus Nebraska in 1923, and then Pierce versus Society of Sisters in 1925. That was a case challenge to a law in Oregon that the Ku Klux Klan had gotten passed that banned private schools. Wow. And the U.S. Supreme Court ruled for private education in that case, and it's because of those cases 100 years ago that Christian and private education has flourished. And then 50 years ago, the rise of homeschooling. Amen. And it's not been like that in every other country in the world. And it's something I never take for granted, and none of us should.
Amen. Listeners, check out HSLDA to learn more about the good work of Homeschool Legal Defense Association. Pray for them. And of course, we are in prayer for our state. May the Lord have mercy. Will, thanks so much.
Thank you, Calvin.